I appreciate you joining me today. We're going to be thinking about Abram, Sarai, and Hagar. The hymn that has been chosen, the hymn we're going to consider today, is the hymn, It Is No Secret.
The chimes of time ring out the news, another day is through. Someone slipped and fell. Was that someone you? You may have longed for added strength, your courage to renew. Do not be disheartened, for I bring hope to you. It is no secret what God can do. What He's done for others, He'll do for you. With arms wide open, He'll pardon you. It is no secret what God can do.
You may not have heard that song before. I hadn't, but appreciate Lee leading that for us. It is no secret. Now, the passage we're going to be looking at is in Genesis chapter 16 and 17. Let's read the first couple verses of chapter 16. Now, Sarai, Abram's wife, had borne him no children, and she had an Egyptian maidservant whose name was Hagar. So Sarai said to Abram, See now, the Lord has restrained me from bearing children. Please go in to my maid. Perhaps I shall obtain children by her. And Abram heeded the voice of Sarai, and so we know what's going to happen, that Ishmael is going to end up being born. To think about the account and how it is no secret what God can do. And that's what I wanted to focus on. What can God do? And what happens when we forget what God can do? And so from Sarai's perspective, you can tell she was bitterly disappointed. She was just bitterly disappointed. She's, of course, an old woman by this time. I believe, let's see, Abram was 86 years old, so he's 85 at this point, roughly, when this is happening. So Sarai is 75, and she's disappointed. You can hear it. You can hear it as she says that God had restrained her. The Lord has restrained me from bearing children. And when we are filled with disappointment, it can cause us to not lean on the Lord and to forget the things that He has done. And here Sarai is, and she's disappointed, and she comes up with this idea, and she presents it to her husband, and he heeds her voice. But it wasn't from God. It wasn't God's plan. Of course, in the grand scheme of things, we recognize the role that Ishmael is going to play. But the seed was going to come through Abraham and Sarah, as we'll see here in just a moment. But we just need to be very careful when we are disappointed with our lot in life, and we should not forget what God can do. Now we look at Hagar, verse 5. Sarai said to Abram, My wrong be upon you. I gave my maid into your embrace. When she saw that she had conceived, I became despised in her eyes. The Lord judge between you and me. So Abram said to Sarai, Indeed, your maid is in your hand. Do to her as you please. When Sarai dealt harshly with her, she fled from her presence. Now the angel of the Lord found her by a spring of water in the wilderness, by the spring on the way to Shur. And he said, Hagar, Sarai's maid, where have you come from, and where are you going? She said, I'm fleeing from the presence of my mistress Sarai. The angel of the Lord said to her, return to your mistress and submit yourself under her hand. Then the angel of the Lord said to her, I will multiply your descendants exceedingly, so that they shall not be counted for multitude. Talking about Ishmael, he goes on, and you can see the prophecies made about him. Hagar bears a son, Ishmael. So, as we think about Hagar and Sarai dealing harshly with her, and she flees, might think about the fear that she must have had. She was a servant, she was a slave, and she was afraid, I would suggest. I think she was also disappointed, but she was afraid. And she had simply done what she was told to do. But now Sarai is dealing harshly with her. And when we're afraid, we can make the wrong decision. You know, all through the Gospels, Jesus repeatedly says, do not be afraid, O ye of little faith. Don't forget what God can do. And that while Ishmael was not going to be the son of promise, Ishmael does have a role to play. And I would suggest, and we may look at it in a future study and not too long, Abraham is going to have Ishmael for 14 years. 14 years plus, actually. He's going to be 14 when Isaac is born. He's going to have him for 14 years plus. And just think about the blessings of being raised by Abraham. That did not fall on deaf ears with Ishmael. We'll put it like that. So Hagar is going to have to go back. Hagar is going to have to go back and submit. You might think in the New Testament, was it Onesimus? I believe, if I'm remembering correctly, you need to go back. And so Hagar goes back. Don't forget what the Lord can do. Even in hard situations where you may be afraid, don't forget what the Lord can do. He'll be with you. Now we turn to Abraham. Down in chapter 17, as the Lord is speaking to him, and you get into, time has gone by now. Abram's 99 years old. The Lord appears to him, speaks of the covenant. This is where he speaks about circumcision, because he's not circumcised at this point. Abram and Ishmael and all those in Abram's house are going to be circumcised, all the servants. The covenant, of course. But as we come down a little further, verse 15, then God said to Abraham, as for Sarai, your wife, you shall not call her name Sarai, but Sarah shall be her name. So this is the chapter where you have the names change. The same letters are added to both names, if you will. That's not the right way to say it. But you, of course, have the father of many nations, as well as Sarah. I will bless her, give you a son by her. She shall be a mother of nations. Kings of people shall be from her. Then Abraham fell on his face and laughed, and said in his heart, shall a child be born to a man who is 100 years old, and shall Sarah, who is 90 years old, bear a child? He falls on his face and he laughs. He falls on his face actually earlier in the chapter in reverence to God, but here he falls on his face in disbelief and he laughs. And he's forgotten what God can do. Is anything too hard for the Lord? He falls on his face and he laughs. And when we don't believe what God can do, when we don't believe that God has the power to do this, just think about the resurrection. That literally means to stand up again. And when people forget what God has done, they forget what God can do. And they laugh and they mock. Abraham, he laughs. Like it's no laughing matter. No laughing matter. What can God do? It is no secret. The power of the Lord, even as we sung about in the hymn, pardon. He will pardon you. Even when we come up with harebrained ideas, if we turn to the Lord, He will pardon us. Even when we fearfully run for our lives, if we turn to the Lord, He will pardon us. And even if we laugh in disbelief, if we will then come to Him and believe in faith, He will pardon us. Appreciate you. Hope you have a good day. Hope it's been helpful for you, this brief study. Tune in tomorrow for another portion of our daily praise.